Greetings, friends. I'm Vitaly Portnikov. Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski said that Ukrainian instructors will train the Polish military in the fight against drones at the NATO training center in Poland. This message itself shows how the Russian-Ukrainian war has changed. Let me remind you that after the 2014 year, and especially in the first months of Russia's Great War against Ukraine, the most important issue of the success of the armed forces of Ukraine in this war was the training of the Ukrainian military to work with advanced technologies that now allow F-16 aircraft to be launched into the Ukrainian sky, or use other military equipment inaccessible to the Russian aggressor. And it became quite obvious that the Ukrainian army, which for decades has dealt primarily with outdated Soviet weapons, is not ready for such work, and that it is necessary to find both time and opportunities to train the Ukrainian military to handle new military equipment. And it was about the fact that literally every day, every month counts in this fierce and endless war. And now the Ukrainian military will train their Polish colleagues to fight drones, after Russia launched 24 unmanned aerial vehicles into Polish airspace and, perhaps, is already starting a drone war with NATO member countries. A war to which the alliance state does not know how to react. And, of course, a war for which the NATO member countries were completely unprepared. And we see this, if only because every time drones worth several hundred, well, maybe several $1,000s appear in the airspace of NATO member countries, the armies of these countries launch expensive F-16 or F-35 planes into the sky, try to shoot down drones with expensive missiles. And it is quite obvious that what if there are massive attacks by Russians on Poland, Romania, or other alliance member countries? No military budget will be enough to fight these massive attacks. Where is their 5%? The reality is that the armed forces of the Russian Federation and Ukraine, over the years, the wars have accumulated experience in handling drones, which the armies of NATO member countries do not have. Therefore, it is possible to have any advanced equipment, any latest technologies, any military budget, and ingloriously lose a modern war that tends to change. Remember when the former Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny, said back in 2022 that the war had reached a dead end, and only technological changes, comparable, for example, with the invention of gunpowder in the wars of the past, were the way out of such wars. So this is the gunpowder in the Russian-Ukrainian war, and perhaps in the new wars of the 21st century, was the appearance of drones as the main weapon. And I do not exclude that in the following years of the Russian-Ukrainian war, as well as in the following wars, which will undoubtedly determine the face of Europe, and the crises in the Middle East, and conflicts in Asia in the coming difficult decades, new technological changes may appear that will radically change the nature of wars, and make absolutely meaningless all the accumulated modern arsenals, and thus will call into question the survival in wars of even countries such as the United States, not to mention European states. This is reality. It is clear that American citizens may not think about it so seriously now, because a Russian drone will not reach the United States. But who said that the United States, and even led by politicians like Trump, will only fight with Russia? Who said that new inventions will not appear that will allow launching certain types of weapons directly from the territory of the United States, making decision-making centers and places of mass gathering of citizens vulnerable? Thus, we really have to learn on the go in conditions of unprecedented danger for the civilized world. and its obvious unwillingness to respond to challenges. Unavailability, which can turn the Western world into a real arena of wars and terrorist acts in the coming years and decades. And here the Ukrainian experience really turns out to be invaluable, because Ukraine turned out to be the first country in the civilized world that has accumulated serious experience in the fight against enemy unmanned aerial vehicles. But, for example, for the countries of the global south, which will confront the West in the upcoming clashes, the Russian Federation has become such a valuable country. The Russian Federation also has quite a lot of experience in the fight against drones and in launching them on hostile territory. Only the Russian military will teach how to handle these new technologies, not to Poles and not to Americans, but to the Chinese. And therefore, in place of NATO member countries, I would not just refuse to accept Ukraine into NATO, as required by Russian President Vladimir Putin, with the support of his de facto counterpart in the Western political world, American President Donald Trump. I would beg Ukraine to join NATO and share technologies important for the survival of European countries and the United States, and for their peaceful existence in the coming years. A peaceful existence that is now guaranteed to no one. Peaceful existence, which at any moment can be interrupted by deafening air raid sirens. In fact, they are already sounding in Poland and Romania, and can turn into the same banal existence of the inhabitants of these countries, as air raid sirens have become commonplace for the citizens of Ukraine during these 3.5 years of war with the Russian Federation. And we are well aware that the reason for the air alarm siren can be just a single reconnaissance drone in the airspace. And you also need to learn how to work with this drone, so that it does not take the necessary pictures of the terrain for subsequent missile attacks, does not determine where the most vulnerable, unprotected places are, where the air defense systems that should be destroyed by the first strike are. That's all this, I think, the Polish military, on the eve of a possible war between Russia and NATO, will be taught by Ukrainian servicemen to their Polish colleagues. Unfortunately, so far this is also a problem of NATO, outside the alliance. And maybe then common sense will prevail and become a more serious reason for dialogue with Ukraine than any motives of Donald Trump, who still dreams of cordial relations with his Russian counterpart. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it. Subscribe to my social networks for channels in Patreon, BAME, and Coffee and Donatello, which helps to develop these user resources with the sponsorship function in YouTube itself. Peace to you.